This is the house where Joel Le Scouarnec lived in Jonzac. When police went inside, what they discovered were child-sized dolls, some of them chained up, hundreds of thousands of indecent images, and also diaries and notebooks where he'd recorded his own acts of abuse.
In a quiet garden in a sleepy French town, the late afternoon sunlight filters through the trees. A man stands completely naked in the grass of his backyard garden. A respected retired pediatric surgeon named Joel Le Scouarnec. He wears a child's wig, his face twisted in grotesque concentration. He films himself with the camera moving slowly, deliberately. Then he turns to the small, lifelike dolls scattered around him. Child-sized figures with blank stares. He speaks to them softly, intimately, stroking their hair or clothing. He tells them and the camera that he has transferred all of his deviant sexuality onto them. They are his now. They never say no. They never tell. This wasn't a one-time bizarre moment. This was routine. And it was happening right next to a 6-year-old girl's backyard until the day she finally told her parents what the man in the garden was doing to her. That single report from a child shattered the illusion and opened the door to one of the most horrifying criminal cases in recent French history. Today we will be discussing this disturbing true story. But before we begin, my name is Holly. Welcome to my little murder she shed. While you are here, we're all here. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can find this not nudie. I am not like the guy sitting in the garden with dolls. I don't know where that came from. So you can find this nerdy true crime gal right here in the Murder She Shed, usually once weekly, but I always have clothes on because I'm not into OnlyFans. If you still want to join me after all that, make sure you hit the subscribe button because a nerdy true crime gal can sometimes get lost in this big YouTube world. Yeah. Just ignore all that and let's just get on with the story. That was just all weird. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and give a viewer discretion is advised because this is an extremely disturbing case. If you can't already tell at the beginning. At just 10 years old, Joel Le Scouarnec already knew he wanted to be a surgeon when he grew up. Joe grew up in a modest traditional working class family in France. On the surface, it looked ordinary. His father Joseph worked as a carpenter. His mom was a homemaker, and she stayed home and raised 2 boys and a girl. But beneath that everyday exterior lay a much darker reality. In the Le Scouarnec household, difficult conversations were simply avoided. Things were better, left unsaid. There was one secret that haunted the family for generations, a history of incest and sexual abuse. Joseph, Joel's father, had himself been a victim. As a young man in seminary, he was violated by a priest, an experience that shattered not only his faith, but left him forever changed. Over the years, whispers and allegations swirled that Joseph had continued the cycle, abusing members of his own family. Joel has always denied that his father ever touched him, but 2 of Joel's own sons later came forward saying their creepy grandpa, as the boys called him, had sexually abused them when they were from the ages of 5 to 10 years old. From an early age, Joel seemed emotionally detached. Family members described him as cold, someone who struggled to feel things the way normal people did. A chilling example came during high school when his grandfather died. Joseph took young Joel to see the body during an autopsy. I have no idea why that is weird. Most teenagers would have been horrified or grief-stricken. Joel felt nothing. He remained cold and showed no emotions. In 1968, he graduated high school and dove straight into medical school. He earned his doctorate in 1981 and went on to specialize in gastrointestinal surgery. While studying, he met Marie Francis, the woman who would become his wife. But Marie carried her own hidden trauma. She had actually also been abused by uncle, his whole family. Wow. When she was a small child. She was described as cold and materialistic. She may have once loved Joel, but after they had 3 sons, the marriage just began to fracture. Marie spent her days doing water aerobics and shopping, enjoying all the money that Joel made as a surgeon. Marie also started having affairs, although Joel didn't seem to mind because he wasn't even attracted to her. He had someone else on his pervy mind, and that was his little niece, who became his first victim. He basically blamed the assault of his 5-year-old niece on her, saying she was extra cuddly and liked to sit on his lap. He said before his niece he had never even been attracted to children. That's just sick to blame your victim that is 5 years old, that doesn't even know what is. Blame them on the way you are, what you are, a monster. Not only did he blame the niece, but so did his wife. During his trial years later, even his wife Marie victim blamed this young child, saying until her niece Alex was an adult, she was always hanging around my husband's neck and calling him darling uncle. In 1982, he began giving his 5-year-old niece Alex piano lessons. Alex's parents weren't always very attentive to her, but her uncle was different. He paid her lots of attention. He seemed interested in her life and what she was doing. To a lonely little girl, that just felt special. One afternoon, family friends were visiting. While everyone gathered in the living room, Joel quietly asked Alex to show him where she played with her friends. She led him into her parents' bedroom. As she stood looking out the window, he slipped his hand down her panties and began touching her. It went on for several minutes until her mother suddenly walked in. Alex's mom, she just froze in the doorway. She saw Joel kissing the top of her daughter's bottom, and she just became paralyzed by shock. So she said nothing. She simply turned around and left the room without a word. I'm sorry, that guy would no longer have hands. If that had been my daughter, I don't care if it was my brother. There would be other visits at Joel's home where Alex's family would spend the night. He would sneak into her bed, the bed that she's sleeping in, and Alex would lay frozen while her uncle molested her. When Alex was 9, during her first communion, her uncle snuck her out to the garden and laid her down on the ground. Adults just everywhere. He had even heard noise and put his hands over the little girl's mouth. It lasted for a while. Everyone was looking for her because it was her party after all. They were waiting for her to cut the cake. She had returned with her head down. Her parents had scolded her. Joel, on the other hand, remained perfectly calm and composed, as if nothing had happened. To the outside world, he was a successful, cultured surgeon, the ideal family man. But behind closed doors, he was systematically abusing his own young niece, all while repeating the same chilling phrase to her: "I'm not doing anything wrong." This was just the beginning of the doctor's abuse towards children. Joel's nursing assistant, who had young daughters of her own, was invited to leave her daughter in Joel Marie's home at night after her husband died, and she was working the night shift. Stephanie was just 6 when she started spending the night in the couple's large home, who had 3 boys of their own by now. And just like with Alex, Joel began grooming Stephanie. He was tender, kind, attentive. He was like a second father, the one she turned to for approval and a smile. Until one night when he came into her room and said, "Don't worry, I won't hurt you." When she resisted, he came night after night until he broke her resistance down. She hid her eyes behind her stuffed animal as this monster abused her. She begged her mom again and again that she didn't want to spend the night at the doctor's house. One night, the doctor had even both Alex and Stephanie in the same room, one after another. It ended when Stephanie was in 6th grade, and her mother decided she was old enough to watch her sisters at her home at night. I imagine she was so happy. Joel even went on to molest his own sister's 3-year-old daughter. His first victim, Alex, although a niece, had not been kin by blood, but she had been his wife Marie's blood-related niece. This time, Joel went on to molest his own sister's children, though. Blood-related. At just 3 years old, Iris's uncle began to touch her. By the time she was 9, it escalated to rape, and he also had her pose for nude pictures. Her younger sister, Paola, was also the doctor's victim. He took photos of both of his nieces while they were asleep in bed, pulling off their clothes as they slept. Joel would use his position as a successful, respected surgeon and the helpful family member to gain access to his sister's little girls, then slowly break down their resistance night after night. The two girls eventually told their mom. So one day as she was driving her brother Joel somewhere, she asked him if he had abused her daughters. He only admitted to touching them and said he gave into his impulses, but had not hurt them. She believed he was sick and told him that she would take him to see a doctor. He cried and pleaded to her, telling her that he would change. Joel's sister told a male cousin, and she asked him to talk to Joel. But in the end, nothing was done. Authorities were not called, and she still brought her daughters around to her predator brother. Eventually, Alex told her mother about what Joel had done to her. And when her mother told her sister Marie about the allegations, Marie said, "Many men like little girls," and seemed not to care if her husband was a... And with that, the family chose silence once again. But while the family looked the other way, the monster was busy writing. After the abuse began, Joel started keeping a meticulous, horrifying journal. In its pages, he recorded everything with cold, clinical precision. The full names of his victims, their ages, the kind of acts he performed on them, and the exact locations where each abuse took place. He described every disgusting detail without shame. He even kept the home addresses of the children he targeted. He labeled some folders with the word and others with the word for. Of course, this was used as a way to organize the victims by sex. Pictures of whatever he wanted to put in that folder. Every single year on his birthday, Joel would write his current age and then proudly declare in his own handwriting, "I am a pedophile, and I am proud of it." Inside the journal, he carefully taped photographs he had taken of his own nieces, along with clippings of their hair that he had secretly kept as trophies. Stephanie was in Joel's journal more than any other child. In the journal, he even admitted to enjoying her more like when she was sleeping. He would sometimes chemically sedate her so that he would not wake her up while he was doing whatever he wanted to do to her. Basically, he wanted her to be one of his dolls. He wanted her to be willing and pliant and never say no, and just like a doll, which is so disturbing. I'm going to try to pronounce these words the best I can, but Lord knows I don't know about any of this. In one entry, Joe typed, "I'm a major pervert. I'm an exhibitionist, a voyeur, a sadist. I'm a scatological, a fetish, a pedophile. And I'm very happy about it," he said. And I was like, what is scatology? Which I do know what scat is. So I was like, I kind of knew sort of what it was. Well, I looked it up anyway. Now I wish I didn't. Now I'm going to spread it onto you so you can enjoy this. Scatology is an enjoyment of poop during acts of pleasure, which makes you understand why he wanted to get in the field where he worked with the digestive process. He liked poop. In his journals, he specified that he would have liked to have a little girl and to go to her at night to cuddle her. Instead, he had 3 sons who all denied that their father touched them. As you already know, Joel wasn't limited to just his family. He and his wife Marie were close friends with another couple who had a sweet little boy named Elliot. Joel abused him too. He wasn't picky about whether his victims were boys or girls. To him, it was all about opportunity. His abuse didn't just occur at home, but also at the hospital on little children who he sedated for surgery. They're like dolls too. Most of these victims did not even know they had been abused until the doctor's journals were found. In 2004, following a sting by the FBI codenamed Operation Falcon, they found Joel had been using his bank card to access a Russian child sex abuse site on the dark web. He was given a 4-month suspended sentence for possessing CSAM. But while his employers were alerted, he wasn't suspended due to staff shortages. Although his wife Marie finally left their home after it was raided, she still continued to take his money. He continued working with children until his retirement. The doctor worked primarily in rural, relatively resource-strapped hospitals, where the loss of a surgeon could have spelled closure for a whole department. In 2008, Joel slept quietly in the sleepy town of Jean-Jacques. Jean-Jacques, I'm trying to talk French. Joncac. I should have looked this up before I did this video, but I did not. So here it is.
Jean-Jacques.
This is located in southwestern France. He settled alone in a detached single-family house that would become his private kingdom of rot and obsession. The modest white stone home, tucked behind a garden fence, offered the perfect seclusion for a man slowly surrendering to his demons. While he still performed surgeries at the local hospital by day, at night he retreated into a sanctuary of filth and perversion that grew more horrifying with every passing year. His estranged wife Marie remained in their old family home, sustained by the money he continued to send her, coins stained with the screams of children he had already violated. Inside his home, the curtains stayed perpetually drawn, trapping the stale air thick with the stench of decay. Dust blanketed every surface like a funeral shroud. Cobwebs draped from the ceiling, and the windows were so grimy they blurred the boundary between the inside horror and the outside world. Hospital staff whispered about his deteriorating hygiene, greasy hair, rank odor of unwashed sweat that followed him into the operating room. What they could never imagine was that this respected surgeon sometimes went 3 to 6 months without bathing his body deliberately, because he savored the sour, dirty taste of the filth accumulating around his private area. At home, he was free to descend fully. He smoked constantly, the haze mixing with the reek of whiskey. He could down nearly a liter a day. The house became a living nightmare. Naked, he would stalk the rooms. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with mirrors that reflected his pale, sagging body. He enjoyed seeing his new body looking back at him. Scattered throughout this temple of depravity were nearly 70 child-sized dolls, some resembling infants, other toddlers, still others frozen in the likeness of children up to 11 years old. One of these dolls sat propped on the living room sofa like a silent, broken guest awaiting its next violation. Many had names. Some were dressed in tiny clothes. One even had its wrist chained. He wrote obsessively in his black notebooks about the rituals he performed on them, covering their plastic skins with his feces and secretions, abusing their bodies afterwards, speaking to them as if they were alive. When boredom or weariness crept in, he would declare a doll dead in his writings, then take a knife and dismember it, carrying the severed plastic limbs and torsos down to the river, dumping the remains like unwanted trash. Naked in the overgrown garden, he staged ever more elaborate scenes, sadomasochistic poses, scatological, wearing wigs, children's underwear, or even diapers while photographing himself. He recorded the number of times he would, pleasure himself, sometimes averaging 400 times a month. In the same notebook, he confessed to acts of with his dogs and a cat, and to covering his own body in urine. He even cooked his excrement, preparing special dishes that he occasionally brought to the hospital, watching with secret delight his colleagues unknowingly sampled what he had made. All the while, his obsession turned outwards. He maintained the garden and the nude, using the fence line as a vantage point to watch the little neighbor girl, Lena. In 2014, a young family moved in next door, Jerome and Laura with their 3-year-old daughter, Lena. A year later, another baby arrived. By 2017, 6-year-old Lena and her 2-year-old brother played more freely in the backyard. The old surgeon began to haunt their innocent world. Lena felt his gaze crawling over her through the fence. He waved at them with a smile that just felt wrong. He tried to speak through the fence in a voice that made the little girl's skin prickle with instinctive fear. Once she even glimpsed him completely naked among the shrubs, pruning them with slow, deliberate motions. Another time, she thought she saw the strange man murmuring softly to what actually looked like dolls while he was sitting in his garden. Lena didn't understand why her stomach twisted when her neighbor appeared. She only knew something deep and ancient warned her. This man was not safe. This man was evil, wearing human skin. Inside the house of mirrors and fields, surrounded by his silent plastic victim, his archive of hundreds of thousands of him and the meticulous records of his perversions, Dr. Joel waited in the growing darkness. The curtains stayed drawn, the whiskey flowed, the dolls waited for their next desecration. And the little girl next door kept playing, unaware that the monster had already chosen his final living obsession. By 2017, he was completely retired and would just sit in his home thinking disturbing thoughts about Lena. He would sit for hours in his carefully arranged living room, staring toward the shared garden fence, imagining things no man should ever imagine about a child. Then nature handed him an opportunity. A violent storm ripped through the town and tore down part of the wooden fence separating his garden from his neighbors and Lena. A jagged opening now connected the two properties, a hidden gateway no one had noticed yet. One afternoon in April 2017, Lena and her father returned from a walk. As they passed the house, a retired surgeon stepped into view. He waved slowly and gave the little girl a smile that just made her skin crawl, a creepy, lingering smirk that didn't reach his cold eyes. Later that evening, safe inside her own home, Lena looked at her father with big, hesitant eyes. "Daddy, do you promise you won't get mad if I tell you something?" She took a deep breath and spoke. "The old man next door, the one with the white hair, he showed me his privates. He asked me to touch him." Her voice grew quieter, trembling. "He came to the broken part of the fence. He called me over. Then he started touching me down there." When doctors examined Lena, they found tears and injuries in her genital area, clear evidence of what this creepy neighbor had done to this trusting little girl. Because of that brave 6-year-old's courage, a true monster was about to be dragged into the light. The family went straight to the police. Investigators began building their case quietly. They prepared search warrants. They gathered a small team of investigators. Then, on the morning of Tuesday, May 2nd, 2017, at 8:45 a.m., 5 officers moved silently into position around house number 34. Inside the house, the old doctor glanced out the window and froze. He knew exactly why they were there. In a panic, he rushed to his bedroom, snatched up his most treasured hard drives, the ones holding years of his sickest secrets, and shoved them separately underneath his mattress. Some dolls were hidden under the floorboards. He didn't have time to hide everything because at 8:50 a.m., the investigators entered. The house felt wrong the moment they entered. I imagine it smelled really bad. The air was heavy, stale, like something had been rotting quietly for years behind closed doors. The living room was filled with odd items. Magazines, cables, hard drives, CDs, and an old push-button telephone were all arranged with eerie precision on the large corner sofa. A single blanket was folded into a neat rectangle, marking the exact spot where the surgeon spent his days, as if he had carved out a tiny private cage for himself in the middle of all these disturbing things. And right within arm's reach sat a doll, a little girl doll staring blankly into the room with dead eyes. But she wasn't alone. Dolls were everywhere. They filled the bedrooms. They lined the hallway. They crowded every corner like silent, watchful children who could never leave. Some stood merely a meter tall, life-sized, eerily realistic. Others were smaller, baby-like. In one box, investigators found piles of children's underwear and toys. In another box labeled containing dolls were more dolls. Actually, 70 total. Behind the sofa, next to an upright piano and a towering bookcase crammed with books, CDs, and vinyls, sat another figure, a blonde doll about 1 meter tall. Her white nightie was pulled up above her hips, frozen in a pose no child should ever be seen in. Some of the dolls had toys attached to them. Later, Joel would admit with chilling calm that he felt emotionally attached to the dolls because they did exactly what he wanted. The IT experts sat down to examine the computers and the hidden hard drives. What spilled out overwhelmed him in just a few short hours. Over 300,000 photographs of children being essayed and around 650 video files mixed with zoophilic or attraction to animals and scatological horror or, poop-filled fantasies. Hundreds of connections traced back to the underground Russian sites where these nightmares were traded like currency. 2 hard drives stood out immediately. Stuck on them were simple white labels with little girls' names that he had abused. And then there was a folder simply called Gore. Inside were horrifying images, mounds of corpse, acts of animal abuse, scenes of pure terror. When asked why he kept them, the surgeon replied with a blank face that he collected these images because they illustrated the reality of our world. No effect on his face, nothing, just cold, empty eyes. But the true horror went even deeper. Investigators also uncovered his black notebooks, his journals, hundreds of handwritten pages and digital files spanning over 30 years. In them, the surgeon meticulously recorded his crimes like clinical notes. Most of those victims had been his patients who were sedated while they were being abused. And because he kept these journals with the child's names and address, most of these victims would be contacted and told of the horrors the doctor had done to them while they were knocked out. Most could not remember what had happened to them, but they just knew all of their lives they'd just been depressed and some sort of feeling they just did not understand. In a file known as the letter, he described every act he'd done to these children in graphic details, sometimes addressing the children directly. These dark journals didn't just confess to fantasies, they cataloged hundreds of real assaults, eventually helping investigators identify 299 victims, most of them young children under his care as a surgeon. 158 were boys and 141 were girls, most of them children with the average age of just 11. Many were as young as 1 or 2, though. He preyed on them while they were at their most vulnerable, under anesthesia, on the operating table, still groggy in the recovery room, or lying alone in their hospital beds after surgery, often routine procedures like appendicitis. He would touch their privates, caress their small bodies, insert his fingers, and in many cases commit. He wrote entries like clinical observations addressing the children directly. Dear little one, or little Marie, you were once again alone. Or describing how he pulled down a toddler's diaper to expose and touch her when mother had briefly turned away. He noted exact times, locations, whether the child was alone, and how he could avoid detection. One entry even detailed how he caressed a 1.5-year-old girl's top and belly before trying to go further. Another described pulling down a 10-year-old's pants in his hospital room and assaulting him because the child was momentarily unsupervised. Another boy only needed 2 stitches, but the doctor told the parents he would have to be sedated in order to be stitched up. He not only could charge them more for sedating the boy, but it also gave him a chance to abuse this little boy. What began as a single complaint from a brave little girl had cracked open one of the darkest chapters in French criminal history and led investigators to discover the doctor's dollhouse of nightmares. In 2020, Joe was sentenced to 15 years for raping and assaulting 4 children, including 2 of his own nieces. Then came the massive 2025 trial, which became France's largest child sexual abuse case. Over 3 months, the 74-year-old surgeon calmly admitted to all 299 counts. He described his acts as hideous and despicable, yet showed almost no emotion. Courtroom observers noted his face remained strangely blank until police read aloud certain passages from his black notebooks. Only then did he flinch and look away. In one shocking moment behind closed doors, he confessed to essaying his own granddaughter. She was his eldest son's baby. He described how he'd even rubbed the baby's pacifier onto his privates before sticking it back into her mouth. His son had to leave the courtroom because his father's testimony was just too much for him to mentally bear. One of the doctor's most dehumanizing statements, he explained, I didn't see them as people. They were the destination of my fantasies. He openly admitted exploiting his position as a surgeon. Joel said during the trial, I was a surgeon who benefited from my status to attack children. I don't deny that, but I did carry out my professional activity as well as I could. But at the same time, I carried out essays on little patients. He added that his pedophile activities had no impact on his professional activities. He couldn't see how it could have. Joel's testimony wasn't the only shocking things heard during his trial. His wife, Marie, who still hadn't divorced her husband for fear that she'd lose any money, also had plenty of evil things to say. Speaking about one niece who had been abused as a small child, the one we were talking about earlier, Marie coldly remarked that the little girl was always hanging around my husband's neck. She suggested the child had been manipulating him. When challenged, she doubled down. Go figure, she's devious, torturous, she said. She even went so far as to say, you know that children can take pleasure in such touching, don't you? That's sick. makes me wonder if she's not one herself. The gallery gasped in horror at the victim blaming. To another victim who had come forward years earlier, Marie France had reportedly said after a previous hearing that the young woman was a liar and a comedian, and that she had well deserved what had happened to her. Her tone was often defensive and self-centered. At one point, she snapped at the presiding judge and lawyers demanding, "Am I the one on trial here?" She accused the court of being violent toward her with their questions and claimed they were trying to make her responsible for everything. Throughout her testimony, she denied knowing her husband was and maintained the posture of a wronged woman who had simply been unlucky enough to fall for a monster, while showing little remorse or compassion for any of these little children whose lives her husband had shattered. Her appearance became one of the most disturbing and talked about moments of the trial, a surreal display of denial, deflection, and occasional venom that left many wondering how much she had truly turned a blind eye to her husband over the years. In the end, after 3 harrowing months of testimony, Joel Le Scouarnec, the white-haired surgeon who had once held the lives of children in his hands, was sentenced to the maximum 20 years in prison allowed under French law for these crimes. The sentence ran concurrently with the 15-year term he had already served from molesting his niece and other children. Today, Joel sits behind bars, his face still strangely blank, his emotions locked away as tightly as the secrets he once guarded under his mattress. But the true nightmare does not end with iron bars or court verdicts. The evil he cultivated festers quietly in the shattered trust of hundreds of survivors, in the nightmares that stalk them decades later, and in the knowledge that this soulless predator may one day walk free again, his hunger unchanged, his blank stare ready to turn toward the next vulnerable child. This case is a brutal reminder that evil often hides behind respectability, authority, and silence. To protect our children, we must do more than rely on broken systems or hope monsters are caught by chance. We need to teach kids that their bodies are their own and that no adult, not even a doctor, teacher, neighbor, nobody, a relative, has the right to make them feel uncomfortable or keep secrets. We must listen carefully when children speak, no matter how small or hesitant their voice is. Parents, schools, and communities should demand better background checks, stricter oversight in medical and caregiving roles, and real consequences of those who fail to report suspicions. Above all, we must break the culture of silence that allows predators to thrive in plain sight, which is exactly what I try to do on my videos. One brave child's words stopped this monster. Imagine how many more could be saved if we all chose to see, to speak, and to act, and to be able to open up about our abuses, so kids can learn to understand that they don't have to be silent, that they can speak. And that's why I do my channel. I love you guys, and always thank you for joining me right here at the Murder She Said. All right, you ready? We're going to come out the end video. Lean back. We might have to lean back. Whee! Go on. Take your time there. Waddle, waddle, waddle. All right. What's up with the back talking, Missy? Get off your high horse and get in your pen. Sorry, I'm eating a chocolate bar. Chicken's already up tonight. I just put them up. Pet Sasa. Pet Sasa. Give him a good old pet, and he likes that. He likes to be petted and loved. He's a good boy. He's a good boy. He's probably a wet boy. Probably a wet boy. Don't lean on him. Just pet him. Pet him. Say, I love you, Sasa. I love you, Sasa. I love you, Sasa. I love you, Sasa. You're my favorite boy.